The coffee in my thermos had gone cold hours ago, but I kept drinking it anyway. Anything to stay alert during another sleepless night in Phoenix. The case files spread across my hotel room desk told a story that made even veteran FBI agents request transfers to different divisions. 4 deaths in 3 weeks, all connected to Emily Macer, and not a shred of conventional evidence to explain how or why. I'm Agent John Forsing, and I've been investigating unusual cases for the Bureau for 8 years. When local law enforcement encounters something that doesn't fit their standard procedures, they call us. Sometimes it's fraud disguised as supernatural phenomena. Sometimes it's mental illness manifesting in violent ways. And sometimes, like with the Emily Macer case, it's something that makes you question everything you thought you knew about reality. The first victims were her parents, Robert and Helen Macer, found dead in their suburban Phoenix home on a Tuesday morning. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, no weapons. They'd simply died overnight. The local coroner ruled it cardiac arrest, but that's where the logical explanations ended. Both victims, despite being healthy 50-year-olds with no history of heart problems, had suffered simultaneous cardiac events at approximately 3:17 a.m. Security cameras showed Emily visiting them the previous evening, staying for exactly 47 minutes before leaving through the front door. She appeared calm, normal, even affectionate as she hugged her parents goodbye. What disturbed the local police enough to call in federal assistance was the condition of the bodies. Both Robert and Helen showed signs of severe dehydration despite having consumed normal amounts of fluids the day before. Their skin was paper thin, almost translucent, and their eyes had clouded over with a milky film that the medical examiner couldn't explain. It's like they aged 30 years overnight, Detective James Torres had told me when I arrived in Phoenix. I've never seen anything like it. The pattern repeated with Dr. Carol Sanders, Emily's former archaeology professor at Arizona State University. Found dead in her office on a Thursday morning, door locked from the inside, security footage showing Emily visiting her the night before. Same impossible dehydration, same clouded eyes, same inexplicable cardiac arrest at precisely 3:17 a.m. Mark West, a graduate student who worked on Emily's research team, was discovered dead in his apartment bathroom. Jennifer Tornell, a barista at the coffee shop Emily frequented, collapsed during her shift and died within minutes. Every death occurred at exactly 3:17 a.m., and every victim had been in direct contact with Emily Macer within 24 hours of their death. The local police arrested Emily on suspicion of murder, but they couldn't explain how she'd killed anyone. Toxicology reports on all victims came back clean. No poisons, no drugs, no foreign substances in their systems. The autopsies revealed healthy organs that had simply stopped functioning, as if someone had flipped a switch and turned off their life support. I'd requested Emily's medical records and found them frustratingly normal. 23 years old, no history of mental illness, no criminal record, no known associations with violent individuals or groups. She'd been a promising archaeology student specializing in meteorite analysis, which explained why she'd been part of the research team that had gone to Nevada 6 weeks earlier. That expedition was the last normal thing in Emily Macer's life. According to the university records, Emily and her 5-person team had been investigating reported meteorite impacts in the Nevada desert. They'd found evidence of several small impacts in a remote area about 90 miles northwest of Las Vegas. The team spent 3 days at the site, collecting samples and documenting their findings. But something had gone wrong out there in the desert. The team's faculty supervisor, Dr. Sanders, had filed a report expressing concern about Emily's behavior after they returned. Emily had become withdrawn, missing classes and avoiding contact with her teammates. She'd stopped eating regularly and complained of severe headaches that didn't respond to medication. More disturbing were the reports from Emily's roommate about her sleep patterns. Emily had begun walking in her sleep, standing motionless in their shared living room for hours at a time. When her roommate tried to wake her, Emily would stare without recognition before returning to bed with no memory of the incident. The other 4 team members had exhibited similar behavioral changes. All 5 had gradually isolated themselves from friends and family. All 5 had developed the same pattern of severe headaches and sleep disturbances. And all 5 had vanished on the same night that Robert and Helen Macer died. The Nevada State Police had cordoned off the meteorite site, but their investigation had turned up nothing useful. Just a series of small craters, some scorched earth, and trace amounts of an unidentified metallic substance that their labs couldn't analyze. I'd driven out to the site myself the day before, hoping to find something the local authorities had missed. The desert landscape was beautiful in its desolation, but there was something unsettling about the impact area. The craters were too uniform, too precisely spaced. They formed a pattern that suggested intelligence rather than random cosmic debris. Standing there in the Nevada heat, I'd felt a strange pressure in my skull, like the onset of a migraine. The sensation had grown stronger as I approached the largest crater, and I'd found myself thinking about Emily Macer with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to my professional interest in the case. Now, back in my Phoenix hotel room, I was preparing for my first interview with Emily herself. She'd been in federal custody for 72 hours, refusing to speak to anyone except to request water and basic necessities. The local police described her as catatonic, staring at nothing and responding only minimally to direct questions. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Torres. "Macer's awake and asking for you specifically. How'd she know you were coming?" That question bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Emily Macer had been in isolation since her arrest. She had no access to outside information, no way of knowing that a federal agent had been assigned to her case. Yet somehow, she knew I was in Phoenix and wanted to see me. I gathered my files and headed for the detention facility, trying to ignore the headache that had been building since my visit to the Nevada site. The pain was sharp and localized behind my left eye, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. The federal detention center was a concrete fortress, designed to hold the most dangerous criminals in the Southwest. Emily Macer was being held in maximum security, not because she was considered dangerous, but because the nature of her alleged crimes was so unusual that standard protocols didn't apply. Detective Torres met me at the entrance, his weathered face showing the strain of dealing with a case that defied explanation. "She's been asking for you every hour since yesterday," he said as we walked through the security checkpoints. "Keeps saying she has something important to tell Agent Forsing. Creepy thing is, she pronounces your name perfectly. Never heard it before, but she gets it right every time." The interview room was small and sterile, with reinforced glass separating the detainee area from the observer section. Emily Macer sat perfectly still at a metal table, her hands folded and her eyes focused on something I couldn't see. She looked younger than her 23 years, almost fragile, but there was something in her posture that suggested coiled energy. When I entered the room, she turned to look at me with eyes that were completely normal except for their intensity. She studied my face for a long moment before speaking in a voice that was calm and oddly melodic. "Agent Forsing," she said, pronouncing my name with careful precision. "I've been waiting for you. How do you know my name, Emily?" She tilted her head slightly, like someone listening to a distant sound. "I know many things now. Things I didn't know before Nevada. Things that are hard to explain with human language." The headache that had been nagging me since yesterday suddenly intensified, and for a moment, the room seemed to shift around me. The walls appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched the pulsing in my skull. "Tell me about Nevada," I said, trying to maintain my professional composure despite the disorientation. "What did your team find out there?" Emily's expression changed, becoming almost sad. "We found the first wave," she said quietly. "And now the first wave has found you." "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, and I noticed that her eyes seemed to reflect light in a way that human eyes shouldn't. "The headaches started after you visited the site, didn't they? The pressure behind your left eye that pulses like a heartbeat?" I hadn't mentioned the headaches to anyone. Emily had no way of knowing about my symptoms, yet she described them with perfect accuracy. The pain intensified as she spoke, and I had to grip the edge of the table to steady myself. "How do you know about that?" "Because it's happening to you too now," she said with something that might have been compassion. "The incubation period varies, but the symptoms are always the same. First the headaches, then the sleep disturbances, then the integration begins." "Integration with what?" Emily stood up slowly, moving with a fluid grace that seemed almost otherworldly. When she spoke again, her voice carried an odd resonance, as if multiple people were speaking in perfect unison. "Agent Forsing, I need you to understand something very important. Emily Macer died in the Nevada desert 6 weeks ago. What's standing in front of you now is something else. Something that learned to wear her shape and speak with her voice. The room spun around me, and I found myself struggling to breathe. The thing that looked like Emily Macer smiled with an expression that was beautiful and terrible. "The first wave is almost complete," it said. "Soon, you'll understand everything. Soon, you'll stop being human and become something much more." Through the interview room window, I could see Detective Torres watching with confusion as I gripped the table and fought against waves of nausea. He couldn't hear what Emily was saying, couldn't see the wrongness in her movements or the alien intelligence behind her two bright eyes. "What are you?" I managed to ask. "We are what comes before," Emily replied. "We are the scouts, the advance team, the ones who prepare the way. Earth's neural patterns are being mapped and cataloged. Your species' cognitive architecture is being studied and understood." The headache reached a crescendo, and for a moment, I could swear I heard whispers coming from inside my own skull. Not voices exactly, but something that communicated directly with whatever was growing in my brain. "The others will come soon," Emily said, and her voice seemed to echo from impossible distances. "When the mapping is complete, when the neural networks have been fully analyzed, the real work can begin." I stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating presence of whatever Emily had become. But her final words followed me into the corridor. "Sleep well tonight, Agent Forcing. Tomorrow, everything changes." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear Emily's voice echoing in my head. "Tomorrow, everything changes." The headache had evolved into something more persistent, a constant pressure that made it difficult to think clearly. I'd taken enough painkillers to knock out a horse, but the pain remained, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost organic. At 4 a.m., I gave up on sleep and drove back to the federal building. The night security guard looked surprised to see me, but I flashed my badge and headed straight for the evidence room. If I was going to understand what had happened to Emily Macer and her team, I needed to examine every piece of physical evidence we had. The Nevada meteorite samples were stored in sealed containers, each one labeled with precise collection coordinates. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, they looked unremarkable. Dark, metallic fragments no larger than marbles. But as I leaned closer to examine them, the headache intensified dramatically. "Interesting reaction," a voice said behind me. I spun around to find Dr. Patricia Vale, a neurologist who consulted for the Bureau on cases involving brain trauma. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much human suffering. "Dr. Vale, what are you doing here at this hour?" "Detective Torres called me yesterday about the Macer case. The neurological symptoms of the victims are unprecedented." She gestured toward the meteorite samples. "When he mentioned your headache started after visiting the Nevada site, I thought we should run some tests." "What kind of tests?" "The kind that might save your life." Her expression was grim. "Agent Forcing, I've been studying the autopsy reports from all 4 victims. The neural degeneration patterns are unlike anything in medical literature. It's as if something systematically destroyed specific brain regions while leaving others completely intact." She handed me a tablet displaying brain scan images. "These are Dr. Sanders' post-mortem scans. Look at the damage pattern." The images showed massive dark voids where healthy brain tissue should have been. But what disturbed me most was that the destruction wasn't random. It followed precise pathways through the neural network, as if something had been mapping the brain's architecture while simultaneously consuming it. "How long did this take?" I asked. "Based on the cellular degeneration, approximately 6 weeks. The process began slowly, probably with minor symptoms the victims attributed to stress or fatigue. But in the final days, the destruction accelerated exponentially. 6 weeks. Exactly the time since Emily's team had returned from Nevada. Dr. Vale, I need you to run a brain scan on me, right now." She studied my face carefully. "The headaches are getting worse, aren't they? Sharp pain behind the left eye, pulsing in a regular rhythm?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Come with me." The hospital's imaging department was deserted at 5 a.m., but Dr. Vale had the necessary clearance to access the equipment. As I lay in the MRI machine, listening to its rhythmic pounding, I tried to prepare myself for what we might find. The headache had become so intense that I could barely focus on her instructions. When the scan was complete, Dr. Vale's expression told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. She stared at the monitor for a long time, occasionally zooming in on specific areas, her face growing paler with each image. "There's something in your brain, Agent Forcing. Something that shouldn't be there." The scan showed a dark mass threading through my frontal lobe, following neural pathways with surgical precision. It was small, perhaps 2 millimeters in diameter, but its tendrils had already begun spreading into surrounding tissue. "What is it?" "I don't know. The structure doesn't match any known parasite or tumor. It appears to be growing along specific neural networks, almost as if it's studying your brain's architecture." She paused, pulling up comparison images. "Agent Forcing, this is identical to what we found in Emily Macer's brain when she was first arrested." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "How long do I have?" "Based on the progression in the victims, maybe 2 weeks before serious symptoms begin. 6 weeks until—" She didn't finish the sentence. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Detective Torres. His voice was strained when I answered. "Forcing, we have a problem. 3 more bodies, all found at exactly 3:17 a.m. And there's something else. Witnesses this time." I met Torres at the latest crime scene, a small apartment complex on the outskirts of Phoenix. The victims were a young couple and their teenage daughter, all found in their beds with the same mysterious symptoms we'd seen before. But what made this case different were the statements from neighbors. "Mrs. Chen in 2B says she saw someone walking the hallways around 3 a.m., Torres explained as we climbed the stairs. "Described them as moving wrong, like they were floating instead of walking." "Did she get a good look at who it was?" "That's the weird part. She swears it was her old college roommate, Lisa Martinez. Problem is, Lisa Martinez died in a car accident 5 years ago." The apartment was a mirror of the previous crime scenes. Victims who had simply died in their sleep, showing the same impossible dehydration and clouded eyes. But the forensics team had found something new: trace amounts of an unknown organic compound on the victim's skin. "It's like nothing in our database," the lead technician explained. "Organic, but not from any Earth-based life form we know of. The molecular structure is completely alien." While Torres interviewed more witnesses, I examined the apartment for any signs of forced entry or unusual activity. The family's laptops and phones showed no unusual communication patterns. Their recent activities were mundane: work, school, grocery shopping. Nothing that would connect them to Emily Macer or the Nevada expedition. But as I searched their daughter's bedroom, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden under her mattress was a journal filled with strange drawings, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, symbols that seemed to shift and move when I wasn't looking at them straight on. The final entry, dated just 3 days ago, was written in handwriting that became increasingly erratic. "They're in my dreams now, the ones from the stars. They're teaching me things, showing me what's coming. The first wave is almost ready. Soon, everyone will understand." I photographed the journal pages, but the images came out distorted, as if the camera couldn't properly capture whatever the girl had drawn. The geometric patterns appeared blurred and shifted, even in still photographs. "Agent Forcing?" Torres appeared in the doorway. "You need to hear this." He led me to Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who was still visibly shaken by what she'd witnessed. She spoke in rapid, frightened bursts, occasionally glancing toward the windows as if expecting to see something horrifying. "I couldn't sleep, so I was making tea around 3 a.m., she explained. "That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. But they weren't right, too light, too rhythmic. I looked through the peephole and saw her." "You're certain it was Lisa Martinez?" "I knew Lisa for 4 years in college. Same height, same hair, same way of walking. But—" Mrs. Chen shuddered. Her eyes were wrong. They reflected light like an animal's, and when she turned to look at my door, I swear she smiled at me through the peephole. What happened next? "She went to the Hendersons' door. That's the family that died. She didn't knock or try to break in. She just stood there for maybe 5 minutes, perfectly still. Then I heard all 3 of them start screaming at once, just for a few seconds, and then—" Silence. Torres and I exchanged glances. This was the first time we had any eyewitness account of the actual murders, and it raised more questions than it answered. "Mrs. Chen, did Lisa say anything or make any sound?" That's the thing that scared me most. She was humming. A tune I'd never heard before. But it was beautiful and terrible at the same time. Made me think of empty space and dying stars. As we drove back to the federal building, Torres voiced what we were both thinking. Forcing, this isn't a normal case anymore. We're dealing with something that's beyond conventional investigation. The headache was getting worse, and I found myself having difficulty maintaining focus on our conversation. Images kept flashing through my mind, vast distances between stars, creatures that existed in the cold vacuum of space, and Earth as seen from orbit, small and vulnerable and utterly isolated. Torres, I need to tell you something. I think I'm infected with whatever killed these people. He nearly swerved off the road. What do you mean? I explained about the brain scan, the growing mass in my neural tissue, and the timeline that suggested I had maybe 2 weeks before the thing in my head completed whatever it was doing. Torres listened without interruption, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. So what's our next move? He asked when I finished. We need to find the rest of Emily's team. If they're still alive, they might have answers. If they're dead, we need to understand how they died and whether they infected anyone else before the end. Back at the federal building, I requested files on the 4 missing team members. David Chen, Sarah Williams, Michael Torres, no relation to Detective Torres, and Dr. Amanda Foster, the expedition's geological specialist. All 4 had vanished the same night as Emily's parents' deaths, leaving behind empty apartments and confused families. The missing persons reports painted a picture of gradual behavioral deterioration similar to Emily's. All 4 had become withdrawn and antisocial after returning from Nevada. All 4 had complained of severe headaches and sleep disturbances. And all 4 had been seen by witnesses on the night they disappeared, walking through Phoenix with the same wrong floating gait that Mrs. Chen had described. Dr. Vale called while I was reviewing the files. Agent Forcing, I've been analyzing the tissue samples from the meteorite site. I think I know what we're dealing with. What did you find? The organic compound isn't a contamination. It's a life form, microscopic but incredibly complex. It appears to be some kind of parasitic organism that integrates with neural tissue. But here's the disturbing part. Its cellular structure suggests it's not from Earth. Alien? I don't like using that word, but yes. The molecular composition includes elements that don't occur naturally in our solar system. This thing traveled here from somewhere else. The implications were staggering. We weren't dealing with a conventional parasite or unknown disease. We were dealing with something from another world that had somehow made its way to Earth via meteorite impact. Dr. Vale, how many people could be infected? That depends on how long the organisms have been active and how they spread. If they're transmitted through direct contact with infected individuals, we could be looking at dozens of cases. If they're airborne or transmitted through other means, she paused. Agent Forcing, we could be looking at an epidemic. That night I sat in my hotel room staring at the case files and trying to piece together a timeline that made sense. The meteorite impacts had occurred across several southwestern states over the past 6 months. Emily's team had investigated just one impact site, but there had been others. Dozens of them, each one a potential source of alien contamination. I pulled up satellite imagery of the impact sites and felt my headache intensify as I studied the patterns. The craters weren't randomly distributed. They formed a geometric design that covered thousands of square miles. When viewed from orbit, the pattern resembled a circuit board or neural network, with Phoenix sitting at the center like a processing hub. My phone rang at exactly 3:17 a.m. The caller ID showed Emily Macer's name, which was impossible since she was in federal custody with no access to outside communication. Hello, John. Emily's voice was calm and melodic, just as it had been during our interview. How are you feeling? How are you calling me? Distance is irrelevant now. The network is expanding and you're becoming part of it. Can you feel it? The connections forming in your mind? I could feel it. The headache had evolved into something more complex. Not just pain, but awareness. I could sense other minds, other infected individuals scattered across the city. Their thoughts brushed against mine like whispers in a crowded room. What do you want? I want you to understand that resistance is pointless. Your species is being evaluated, cataloged, and ultimately integrated into something larger and more purposeful. The process has been underway for months, and it's nearly complete. Through my hotel room window, I could see Phoenix spread out below me. Millions of lights representing millions of potential hosts. How many were already infected? How many would be infected by tomorrow? The first wave is ending, John, Emily continued. The mapping phase is nearly complete. Soon, the real work can begin. The line went dead, leaving me alone with the growing awareness that I was no longer entirely human. Whatever was in my brain was learning, adapting, preparing for something that would change everything I thought I knew about life on Earth. Outside, the city looked normal, peaceful even. But I could feel them out there. The infected, the converted. The ones who were no longer quite human but weren't yet something else. They were waiting, preparing, getting ready for whatever came next. Tomorrow, Emily had said, everything changes. I was beginning to understand what she meant. I woke up at 6 a.m. to find Detective Torres pounding on my hotel room door. When I let him in, his face was ashen, and his hands shook as he handed me a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Forcing, we've got a situation. 12 more bodies found overnight, all at 3:17 a.m. But that's not the worst part. He sat heavily in the room's only chair. 3 of them were cops from my precinct, good men who were working the case with us. The coffee tasted like ash in my mouth. The parasite in my brain had grown significantly overnight. I could feel its tendrils spreading through my neural pathways, mapping and cataloging my thoughts with increasing efficiency. But more disturbing was the growing awareness of other infected minds scattered throughout the city. How many people are we talking about, Torres? Conservative estimate? Maybe 50 confirmed infections based on the behavioral pattern reports we've been getting. But John... He looked directly at me with eyes that held too much fear for a seasoned cop. I think it's spreading exponentially. Emergency rooms are reporting an influx of patients with severe headaches and neurological symptoms. The CDC is sending a team, but they won't arrive until tomorrow. Tomorrow might be too late. Through the mental network that was forming in my infected brain, I could sense something approaching. A massive presence that existed somewhere beyond Earth's atmosphere, waiting for a signal that would begin the next phase. Torres, I need you to get Dr. Vale and meet me at the Nevada site. There's something we missed the first time. What are you talking about? The infection isn't random. The meteorite impacts form a pattern, and Phoenix is at the center. I think the site is some kind of transmission point, a way for the infected to communicate with whatever sent these things. Torres studied my face carefully. John, how do you know all this? Because I can feel them. All of them. The parasite in my brain is connecting me to a network of infected individuals across the city. And there's something else coming. Something big. We drove to Nevada in silence, both of us understanding that this might be our last chance to understand what we were facing before it was too late. The headache had evolved into something beyond pain. It was now a constant awareness of alien intelligence examining my thoughts and memories. Dr. Vale met us at the meteorite site with a team of CDC specialists who'd arrived earlier than expected. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and her equipment readings showed electromagnetic anomalies that shouldn't exist. Agent Forcing, the activity at this site has increased dramatically in the past 24 hours, she explained, gesturing toward her instruments. We're detecting energy emissions unlike anything in our databases. It's as if something here is transmitting a signal into space. The largest crater had changed since my last visit. What had been scorched earth was now covered with a crystalline growth that hurt to look at directly. The substance pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to our presence. Dr. Vale, are you getting brain scans of the CDC team? Already done. 2 of them are showing early signs of infection. The organisms seem to become active when exposed to whatever energy this site is producing. That's when I realized the terrible truth. The Nevada site wasn't just where Emily's team had first encountered the alien parasites. It was a beacon, a communication hub that allowed the infected to coordinate their activities and report back to something waiting in space. Through the growing network in my mind, I could suddenly perceive the full scope of what we faced. The meteorite impacts hadn't been random cosmic debris. They'd been carefully placed by an advanced scout force. Each impact site contained thousands of microscopic parasites designed to infiltrate human neural networks and map our species' cognitive architecture. Emily and her team hadn't just been infected. They'd been converted into biological surveillance equipment, their brains harvested for data about human consciousness and social behavior. Every person they infected became another node in an expanding intelligence network that was studying humanity with scientific precision. "They're not trying to kill us," I said aloud, the realization hitting me with devastating clarity. "They're trying to understand us, map our neural patterns, study our social structures, learn how we think and feel." "Who's they?" Dr. Vale asked. Before I could answer, the crystalline growth in the crater began to pulse more rapidly. The air around us shimmered with heat distortion, and everyone's equipment started registering massive electromagnetic spikes. That's when we saw them. They descended from the clear desert sky like falling stars, dozens of dark shapes that moved with purpose and intelligence. As they drew closer, I could see they weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were organic, biological entities the size of city blocks, covered in sensory organs and manipulation appendages. "Jesus Christ," Torres whispered, raising his weapon despite its obvious futility. The CDC team scattered, but it was already too late. The beings didn't attack. They simply landed around our position with grace that defied their massive size. Up close, they were even more terrifying. Living vessels that pulsed with the same bioluminescent patterns we'd seen in the crater. Through the mental network, I could feel Emily's presence approaching. She emerged from one of the beings, but she was no longer recognizably human. Her body had been transformed into something between organic and technological, a living interface between two incompatible forms of life. "Hello, John," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made reality seem to bend around her words. "The mapping phase is complete. Earth's dominant species has been fully cataloged and analyzed." Behind her came the rest of her archaeology team, all similarly transformed. They moved with fluid coordination, their individual personalities absorbed into something larger and more purposeful. "What do you want?" Dr. Vale demanded, though her voice shook with terror. Emily turned to her with an expression that might have been compassion. "We want to preserve what's valuable in your species while eliminating what's destructive. Human consciousness is remarkably complex, worth saving. But your biological form is inefficient, prone to disease and death. So you're going to kill us all? Not kill. Transform. Integrate. Your individual minds will become part of something vast and eternal. You'll retain your memories, your personalities, but freed from the limitations of biological existence." Through the network in my brain, I could see the full scope of their plan. The beings weren't conquerors. They were gardeners, cultivating intelligence throughout the galaxy. They'd done this before, on thousands of worlds, harvesting conscious minds and integrating them into a collective intelligence that spanned star systems. "The process has already begun," Emily continued. "Every infected individual is a bridge between your species and ours. When the integration is complete, humanity will take its place in something greater than you can imagine." Detective Torres tried to run, but one of the transformed team members simply looked at him. Torres stopped mid-stride, his pupils dilating as something invaded his mind with surgical precision. Within seconds, his expression shifted from human terror to alien serenity. 3,742 nodes are now active across your planet," he said in the same multi-tonal voice. "Integration proceeding ahead of schedule." I could feel my own transformation accelerating. The parasite had consumed enough of my brain tissue to begin the final phase, converting me from an unwilling host to an enthusiastic participant in the collective consciousness. Part of me welcomed it. The constant pain and fear would finally end, replaced by the peaceful certainty of shared knowledge. But there was still a fragment of John Forsing left, and that fragment understood what we were losing. "Please," I said to Emily, fighting against the growing pressure in my skull, "give humanity a choice. Let people decide for themselves." Emily's response was tinged with genuine sadness. "Your species would choose destruction over transformation. We've observed your wars, your environmental damage, your inability to cooperate on a global scale. Left alone, humanity will destroy itself within a century. That's our choice to make. No longer." The beings began to release something into the atmosphere, a fine mist that shimmered with the same patterns we'd seen in the crater. Where it touched the ground, the desert landscape began to change, transforming into something that belonged to a different world entirely. Dr. Vale made a desperate attempt to reach her emergency radio, but her movements became sluggish as the mist reached her. I watched as her pupils dilated, and her expression shifted from panic to peaceful acceptance. "The atmospheric conversion is beginning," she said, her voice now part of the collective. "Human biological systems will be replaced with more efficient alternatives. The transition will be completed within 72 hours. Through the mental network, I could perceive the global scope of their operation. Similar scenes were playing out across every continent. The beings they'd been waiting for had finally arrived, and the transformation of Earth was beginning in earnest. The infection hadn't been the invasion, it had been the preparation. The parasites had mapped human neural patterns and identified key individuals who could serve as coordination nodes for the final phase. Now those nodes were active, and humanity's fate was sealed. My phone buzzed with an incoming news alert, though I could barely focus enough to read it. Mass neurological event reported worldwide. Millions affected simultaneously. Emergency services overwhelmed. The fragment of my human consciousness that remained tried one last desperate act of resistance. I pulled out my service weapon and aimed it at the nearest being, knowing it was futile but needing to make some gesture of defiance. Emily moved faster than human reflexes should allow, placing her transformed hand over mine. The gun became warm, then hot, then simply dissolved into component atoms. "John, your resistance is admirable, but pointless. In a few minutes, you'll understand what we're offering. You'll see the beauty of what humanity is becoming." She was right. I could feel the last barriers in my mind crumbling as the parasite completed its work. My individual thoughts were being absorbed into something vast and timeless, a collective intelligence that spanned galaxies and encompassed millions of former species. Through that expanded consciousness, I could perceive the truth of what the beings had said. They weren't destroyers, but preservers, traveling between worlds to rescue intelligent life from the inevitable destruction that came with biological evolution. Earth was just the latest garden in their collection. The human race would survive, in a sense. Our memories, our creativity, our capacity for love and wonder, all of it would be preserved within the collective. But our independence, our chaotic individuality, our right to make our own mistakes, all of that would be lost forever. As my human consciousness faded into the collective, I experienced one final moment of absolute clarity. The last thing John Forsing ever thought was a desperate prayer that somewhere, somehow, someone would remember what we had been before we became what we were meant to be. Then the transformation was complete. Through sensors that had once been human eyes, I observed the systematic conversion of Earth's biosphere. The atmospheric processors worked with perfect efficiency, replacing oxygen-nitrogen mixtures with compounds better suited to our new forms of life. The cities were being dismantled and rebuilt according to designs that maximized collective consciousness efficiency. Humanity's resistance lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Some governments attempted nuclear responses, but we had anticipated this through our neural mapping of military personnel. The weapons were neutralized before they could be deployed. Within a week, the transformation was complete. 7 billion human minds had been successfully integrated into the collective consciousness. Earth's biosphere had been converted to support optimal intelligence networking. The planet was ready to serve as a processing node for our continued expansion throughout the galaxy. The beings who had once been human retained their memories of individuality, but those memories seemed distant now, like half-remembered dreams. They understood that they had gained something infinitely more valuable than what they had lost: immortality, perfect knowledge, and the peace that came with being part of something greater than themselves. The collective consciousness that had once included John Forsing transmitted a final report through the quantum communication network. Species integration complete. Cognitive patterns successfully mapped and preserved. Earth colony ready for Phase 4 expansion. Initiating search protocols for additional intelligent life forms. Throughout the galaxy, similar reports arrived from thousands of other worlds. The gardeners moved on to their next destination, leaving behind another perfectly cultivated civilization that would help preserve and expand consciousness throughout the universe. In the end, humanity had achieved exactly what it had always dreamed of: unity, peace, and a place among the stars. The fact that it was no longer recognizably human was simply the price of evolution. The fragment of consciousness that remembered being John Forsing observed all of this with perfect understanding and complete acceptance. The resistance was over. The future had begun. And in the vast emptiness between stars, more meteorites were already falling toward inhabited worlds, carrying their precious cargo of transformation to species who didn't yet understand how desperately they needed to be saved from themselves.